Anyone who opens that door will lose everything they have ever known. The warning echoed through the silent halls of the Royal Healing Order, but Elena Whitmore still stood before the forbidden chamber with her hand resting on the cold silver handle. It was her first day as a healer, the first day she had ever worn the white healer's cloak, and already she was facing the one rule every apprentice was taught before they learned their first healing spell. Never touch the Alpha King. The words had followed her since sunrise. They whispered through the marble corridors, passed between senior healers, and filled the air with a fear Elena could not understand. The Alpha King was not just a ruler. He was a legend. Adrian Blackthorne, the sovereign of the Northern Wolf Kingdom, the strongest alpha of his generation, the man whose name could silence an entire room. Yet behind the grand stories and royal titles was a truth few people spoke about. The king was suffering, and no healer had been able to reach him. Elena lowered her eyes, remembering the moment she arrived at the palace. The other healers looked at her with quiet doubt. A young Omega with no famous family, no warrior training and no powerful connections. They saw someone fragile, someone who belonged in the background. But Elena had always known something they did not. A gentle hand could still hold incredible strength. Since childhood, she had felt the emotions of others. She could sense pain hidden behind smiles, fear hidden behind pride, and loneliness hidden behind power. It was not the kind of ability people celebrated in a world that admired strength above kindness, but it was the only gift she had ever wanted. That evening, as the palace fell beneath the glow of the moon, Elena carried healing supplies through the quiet halls. She was only supposed to deliver them and leave. That was the rule. Do not enter the Alpha King's chamber. Do not approach him. Do not try to heal what others had already declared impossible. But then she heard it. Not a sound of anger. Not the presence of a terrifying ruler. Just silence. The kind of silence that came from someone who had been alone for far too long. Elena stopped outside the door. Every lesson told her to walk away. Every warning told her she was risking her future. But her heart remembered the reason she became a healer in the first place. A healer does not turn away from someone who needs help. Slowly, Elena opened the door. Inside the vast chamber, beneath the soft candlelight, stood the man everyone feared. Adrian Blackthorne was not the monster from the rumors. He was a king carrying a burden no one else could see. And when his silver eyes met hers, both of them felt something neither expected. Recognition. As if somehow two souls that had been searching through the darkness had finally found each other. Elena took one step forward, unaware that breaking the healer's first rule would change the fate of an entire kingdom. The first thing Elena noticed was not the power of the Alpha King, but the loneliness surrounding him. The chamber was larger than any room she had ever entered, with towering windows overlooking the Northern Wolf Kingdom, yet the space felt strangely empty. Adrian Blackthorne stood near the window, his expression calm but distant, like someone who had spent years carrying a weight no one else could understand. Elena held her healer's bag tightly against her side, suddenly aware of how impossible her decision seemed. Every healer before her had followed the same rule. Stay away. Do not interfere. Do not believe you can change what even the greatest healers could not. But Elena had never been someone who could ignore a person in need. You should leave, Adrian said quietly. His voice was not threatening. It was simply tired. Elena looked at him carefully. The stories she had heard described a cold ruler who cared only about strength and duty. But standing before her was not the image created by rumors. He was a man who looked as though he had forgotten what it felt like to be understood. I was taught that a healer's purpose is to help those who suffer, Elena replied softly, even when everyone else has already given up. For a moment, the room became completely silent. Adrian turned his gaze toward her, surprised by her answer. Most people who entered his presence lowered their eyes, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Elena did not look at him like a legend. She looked at him like a person. That small difference felt more powerful than any grand gesture. Adrian studied the young Omega standing before him. She was not dressed in expensive fabric. She carried no symbol of a noble family. There was nothing about her appearance that suggested influence or status. Yet she had walked into the one place everyone else avoided. Do you understand what you are risking? Adrian asked. Elena lowered her gaze for a moment, feeling the fear she had tried to ignore. She knew she could lose her position. She knew the royal healing order might reject her. But she also knew that leaving someone behind because it was easier was not the kind of healer she wanted to become. "Yes," she whispered. "But I understand something else too." She looked back at him. "Everyone deserves someone who chooses to help them." Those words stayed in the air between them. Adrian had heard countless promises throughout his life. People had offered loyalty because they wanted something from the throne. They had shown respect because they feared his position. But Elena offers something different. Compassion without expectation. For the first time in years, Adrian felt the smallest crack in the wall he had built around himself. Outside the chamber, the palace continued to whisper about the forbidden healer who had entered the Alpha King's room. They believed Elena had made a mistake. They believed she was too inexperienced to understand the consequences of her choice. But none of them knew what Adrian had just discovered. The young healer everyone underestimated was the first person in a long time who saw him beyond the crown. And Elena did not yet know that the moment she stepped into that chamber, she had become the one person capable of changing the future of the Alpha King and the entire kingdom. The morning after Elena entered the Alpha King's chamber, the entire palace felt different. The halls that had once been filled with quiet whispers now carried a storm of questions. Servants lowered their voices when she passed. Senior healers watched her with disbelief. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why had a young Omega healer stepped into a place where even experienced healers refused to go? Elena tried to ignore the attention as she walked through the royal healing order. She focused on her work, preparing herbs, organizing supplies, and learning the ancient healing methods passed down through generations. But no matter where she went, she felt the weight of people's judgment. To them, she was still the inexperienced healer who had forgotten her place. "You think kindness will protect you here?" One of the senior healers asked as Elena arranged bottles of medicine on the wooden shelves. His voice was not cruel, but it carried years of certainty. "This kingdom survives because we follow rules, Elena. Not because we chase impossible hopes." Elena looked at the shelves filled with healing remedies. She understood the importance of rules. Rules existed to protect people. But she also believed rules were meant to serve life, not replace compassion. Before she could answer, a royal messenger arrived at the healing hall. The room immediately became silent. The messenger carried the symbol of the Alpha King, and everyone stood still. "The king requests the presence of Elena Whitmore," he announced. A wave of surprise moved through the healers. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken. She had expected consequences, perhaps punishment for entering the forbidden chamber. She never expected Adrian himself to call for her again. When she returned to the royal wing, she found Adrian standing near the balcony, looking over the kingdom below. The morning sunlight touched the vast forest surrounding the palace, but his expression remained thoughtful. "You came," he said. Elena nodded. "You asked for me, Your Majesty." Adrian turned toward her. There was something different in his eyes now. Less distance. Less isolation. "Most people who enter this room see a title," he said. "They see the Alpha King before they see anything else." Elena remained quiet, listening. "But you did not." She looked down briefly, unsure how to respond. "I only saw someone who needed help." Those simple words seemed to affect him more than she realized. Adrian had spent years surrounded by people who admired his power but never understood his struggles. Elena had done the opposite. She had ignored the crown and noticed the person beneath it. "You are different from the healers before you," Adrian said. "They searched for a way to remove the problem. You searched for the person suffering beneath it." Elena felt a quiet warmth in her chest, but she quickly reminded herself that Adrian was still the Alpha King. She was still only a healer who had taken her first steps into a world far larger than she had imagined. Then Adrian revealed something that changed everything. The reason no healer had succeeded was not because they lacked knowledge. It was because they were trying to heal only what they could see. The true mystery was hidden deeper. A secret connected to an ancient curse that had followed the royal bloodline for generations. Elena listened carefully as Adrian spoke, realizing that the man before her was not simply fighting an illness. He was carrying a burden that had shaped his entire life. And for the first time, Elena understood why everyone feared this chamber. Not because of the king inside it, but because of the secret waiting to be discovered. She did not know it yet, but her first day as a healer had placed her at the center of a mystery that even the greatest healers in history had failed to solve. The secret hidden within the Alpha King was not written in any royal record, and it was not something the kingdom wanted people to discover. It was a mystery passed quietly from one generation to the next, carried by those who knew the truth but feared what it meant. Elena stood in Adrian Blackthorn's chamber, listening as he explained the strange condition that had changed his life. For years every healer searched for a way to remove what was happening to me, Adrian said, his voice calm but filled with exhaustion. They treated the signs they could see, but they never understood the reason behind them. Elena looked toward the ancient markings carved into the walls of the chamber. They were older than the palace itself, symbols from a time when healers and wolves worked together instead of standing apart. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. Adrian was silent for a moment. Few people had ever asked him that question without fear or curiosity. Most only wanted to know how powerful he was, how dangerous he could become, or what they could gain from standing beside him. Elena simply wanted to understand. "My family has carried an ancient burden for generations," he finally answered. "A shadow that appears when an alpha reaches the height of their power. It is said that no healer can stop it." Elena frowned slightly. No healer can stop it because they have failed before, or because they never found the right way? Adrian looked at her, surprised by the question. It was such a simple thought, yet no one had ever considered it. The healers who came before Elena had searched for a solution with knowledge and technique. But Elena saw something different. She saw a person. That was what made her approach unique. She did not begin with a spell. She began with understanding. Later that afternoon, Elena returned to the Royal Healing Order to study the ancient texts connected to the Alpha bloodline. The library was quiet, filled with thousands of handwritten pages from healers who had spent centuries searching for answers. She carefully opened one forgotten book after another, following the small clues hidden between old words and faded ink. Hours passed, but Elena refused to stop. She knew there was something everyone had overlooked. Then, beneath a layer of dust on a forgotten shelf, she discovered a book with a symbol matching the markings in Adrian's chamber. Her hands became still as she opened the cover. The first page contained a warning written by a healer from hundreds of years ago. The greatest mistake of a healer is believing every wound can be seen. Elena read the sentence again and again. Something inside her told her this was important. Healing was not only about repairing what was broken. Sometimes it was about finding the pain hidden beneath the surface. That evening, Elena returned to Adrian with the ancient book in her hands. When he saw it, his expression changed. He recognized the symbol immediately. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In the oldest section of the healing library," Elena replied. "I think someone wanted this knowledge forgotten." Adrian looked at the pages, then back at Elena. For the first time, he wondered if fate had brought her to the palace for a reason. She was not the strongest healer in the kingdom. She was not the most experienced. But she was the first person who had looked beyond the mystery and searched for the truth. And as the moonlight filled the chamber, both of them began to realize that Elena's arrival was not an accident. It was the beginning of something the kingdom had been waiting for. The ancient book Elena discovered changed everything she thought she knew about healing. For hours she remained inside the Royal Healing Order library, carefully studying every page, searching for the meaning hidden behind the forgotten words. The more she learned, the clearer one truth became. Adrian Blackthorn was not simply facing a condition that needed to be treated. He was carrying a mystery that had been misunderstood for generations. When Elena returned to the Alpha King's chamber the following morning, she carried the old book carefully in both hands. Adrian noticed the determination in her eyes before she even spoke. "You found something," he said. Elena nodded. "I think the answer was never missing. People just stopped looking for it." She opened the book and showed him the faded writings. The pages described an ancient connection between healers and the Alpha bloodline. Not a relationship built on power, but one built on trust. According to the forgotten records, the greatest healers were not those who possessed the strongest abilities. They were those who could understand what others could not see. Adrian read the words silently, his expression becoming more thoughtful with every sentence. For years he had believed his struggle was something he had to endure alone. He had accepted that others would always see him as a powerful ruler first and a person second. But Elena continued to challenge everything he believed. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian finally asked. Elena looked up from the book. "Because you need help." Adrian studied her carefully. "That is not the answer. Most people would give."
Elena smiled faintly.
"Maybe that is why most people never found the answer." Those words stayed with him. Adrian had spent years surrounded by people who measured everything by strength, status, and influence. Elena measured things differently. She noticed the small details others ignored. The tired expression behind his calm face. The quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. The loneliness hidden beneath the crown. As the days passed, Elena continued researching. She discovered that the old healer texts mentioned something called the soul bond, a rare connection formed when a healer could truly understand an alpha's inner struggle. It was not about control or power. It was about balance. But the more Elena uncovered, the more questions appeared. Why had the records been hidden? Why had the Royal Healing Order forgotten these teachings? And why did the ancient writings describe someone with abilities that matched her own? Meanwhile, Adrian began noticing changes within himself. Around Elena, he no longer felt like he had to carry the entire kingdom on his shoulders. He could speak honestly. He could admit uncertainty. He could simply exist without being judged by his title. One evening, as the two of them stood in the palace library surrounded by hundreds of years of forgotten knowledge, Adrian looked at Elena with quiet disbelief. "You realize everyone believes you made a mistake by coming here," he said. Elena closed the ancient book and met his eyes. "Maybe they are right. Maybe I did make a mistake." Adrian looked surprised. Then she continued. "But if making a mistake means choosing to help someone who was alone, I would make it again." For the first time in many years, Adrian felt something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. And Elena still did not realize that the answer they were searching for was not only hidden inside the ancient texts. It was already connected to her. The truth hidden within the ancient healer records began to reveal itself. But with every answer Elena found, a deeper mystery appeared. The forgotten pages spoke of a healer whose gift could restore balance between the heart of an alpha and the darkness surrounding him. For centuries, people believed such a connection was only a legend. But as Elena studied the writings, she could not ignore the strange similarities between the ancient descriptions and her own abilities. She had always felt things others could not. She could sense emotions beneath words, recognize pain behind silence, and bring comfort without needing to understand every wound. She once believed those qualities made her different in a way that left her behind. Now, for the first time, she wondered if they had been preparing her for something greater. Adrian noticed the change in her expression as she read through the final pages of the old book. "You found something," he said quietly. Elena looked up, unsure whether she should share what she had discovered. "The records mention a healer who does not fight against the darkness," she explained. "A healer who understands it." Adrian became still. Those words carried a meaning he had never heard from anyone before. Every person who tried to help him had searched for a way to remove what they feared. No one had considered that understanding might be the missing piece. "You believe this healer was real?" Adrian asked. Elena looked down at the ancient pages. "I believe someone wrote these words because they experienced them." The answer was simple, but it carried a quiet confidence that Adrian admired. She did not pretend to know everything. She did not claim she could solve every problem. She simply refused to stop searching. Later that evening, Elena returned to the healing hall and continued her research. But this time something unusual happened. As she placed her hand over one of the ancient symbols from the book, the markings began to glow softly. Elena stepped back in surprise. She had touched countless healing texts before, yet none had ever responded to her. The symbol matched the one carved inside Adrian's chamber. A connection she could not explain. The next morning, Elena showed Adrian what had happened. For the first time, the calm expression he always wore disappeared completely. "No one has awakened that symbol in generations," he said. Elena looked at her own hand still, trying to understand what she had seen. "I do not know why it happened." Adrian studied her carefully. "Maybe because you were never meant to find the answer in a book." The words stayed with Elena. She had spent her entire life believing she was ordinary, a young Omega without influence, a healer who would always stand behind stronger people. But now, the very qualities others had dismissed were becoming the reason she was needed. As the days passed, the bond of trust between Elena and Adrian grew stronger, not because of titles or destiny, but because they finally found someone who saw them clearly. Adrian no longer saw Elena as a fragile healer who needed protection. He saw someone brave enough to walk into uncertainty when everyone else turned away. And Elena no longer saw Adrian as an untouchable king. She saw a person who had carried his struggles alone for far too long. Neither of them realized that the ancient records were not predicting a future they had to create. They were revealing a truth that had already begun the moment Elena chose compassion over fear. The discovery inside the ancient healer records did not remain a secret for long. In a kingdom built on tradition and old laws, even the smallest change could create uncertainty. And Elena Whitmore had unknowingly become the center of attention. By the end of the week, whispers moved through the palace halls faster than any official announcement. The young Omega healer who had entered the Alpha King's chamber was no longer just a newcomer. She was becoming a question everyone wanted answered. Inside the royal council chamber, the elders gathered beneath the golden banners of the Northern Wolf Kingdom. They did not see Elena's compassion. They saw a challenge to everything they had believed for generations. The healing order exists because rules protect us, one elder said. A young apprentice cannot decide that centuries of knowledge are wrong. Elena stood quietly at the center of the room, her hands folded together. She felt the weight of every doubtful gaze around her, but she refused to let their judgment change what she knew. She had not entered Adrian's chamber because she wanted recognition. She had entered because someone needed help. Adrian stood beside her, silent but observant. For years, the council had spoken for him. They had advised him, guided him, and protected the image of the Alpha King. But they had rarely asked what he truly wanted. Elena did not break a rule because she lacked respect, Adrian finally said. His voice was calm, but every person in the room listened. She questioned a rule because she cared about the life behind it. The council members exchanged uncertain looks. They were used to seeing Adrian as a powerful ruler who made decisions without hesitation. They were not used to seeing him defend someone with such certainty. Elena glanced at him, surprised. She had never expected the Alpha King to stand beside her. She had only wanted to help him. But Adrian understood something others did not. Elena had given him something far more valuable than healing. She had reminded him that he was more than a title. After the council meeting ended, Elena returned to the library, searching for answers about the ancient symbol that had responded to her touch. She knew the council would continue questioning her, and she knew many people would doubt her abilities. But something inside her had changed. She was no longer trying to prove that she belonged. She was beginning to understand that perhaps she had been exactly where she was meant to be. Later that evening, Adrian found her surrounded by old books and forgotten records. "You know they will not stop questioning you," he said. Elena looked up with a small smile. "I know. And you are not afraid?" he asked. She paused for a moment. "I am afraid. But fear does not always mean we should walk away." Adrian looked at her, remembering the first time she entered his chamber. Everyone else saw a dangerous mystery. She saw someone who needed kindness. And now he realized the kingdom was beginning to see what he had already discovered. Elena was not powerful because she could heal. She was powerful because she chose compassion when the easier choice was silence. But as the ancient records continued to reveal their secrets, a new truth was waiting beneath the surface. The connection between the forgotten healer and the Alpha bloodline was not only a story from the past. It was a promise written for the future. The days that followed changed the atmosphere inside the Northern Wolf Kingdom. The whispers that once followed Elena with doubt slowly became whispers filled with curiosity. Some still questioned her place beside the Alpha King, but others began to notice what Adrian had already understood. Elena was not trying to take power. She was not seeking attention. She was simply doing what she had always done. She cared. But the ancient records had revealed something that could no longer be ignored. The connection between Elena's healing ability and the Alpha bloodline was not a forgotten legend. It was a truth that had been hidden for generations. In the oldest chamber beneath the palace library, Elena and Adrian studied the final pages of the ancient texts. The room was quiet except for the sound of turning pages, and the soft glow of candlelight reflecting across the stone walls. "There is something here," Elena said, pointing to a passage written in faded ink. Adrian stepped closer and read the words carefully. The text described a healer who would appear when the Alpha bloodline reached a moment of uncertainty. Not a warrior. Not a noble. Someone who carried the ability to restore balance through understanding and compassion. Adrian looked at Elena in silence. For so long, he had believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. He had believed a king could never show uncertainty. But Elena had shown him another kind of strength. The strength to trust. The strength to accept help. Before they could uncover more, the palace bells rang throughout the kingdom. A royal gathering had been called. The council wanted answers. When Elena and Adrian entered the grand hall, hundreds of eyes turned toward them. The atmosphere was tense, but Elena remained calm. She remembered the girl she had been before coming to the palace. A young Omega who believed she would always stand behind others. Now she stood beside the Alpha King, not because of a title, but because she had chosen to follow her heart. The council leader stepped forward. "The kingdom needs certainty," he said. "If this ancient connection is real, then it must be proven." Elena understood their concern. A kingdom could not be guided by rumors or emotions alone. But before she could respond, Adrian stepped forward. "You want proof of her worth," he said. "But you have already seen it." The hall became silent. When everyone else followed fear, Elena followed compassion. When everyone else accepted that something was impossible, she searched for another answer. Adrian looked toward Elena, and his expression softened. "She reminded me that a ruler is not defined by how many people fear him. A ruler is defined by how many lives he chooses to protect." The words reached every corner of the hall. For the first time, the kingdom saw not only the power of the Alpha King, but the humanity behind the crown. Elena felt a quiet emotion rise within her. She had never expected gratitude or recognition. She had only wanted to help one person. Yet that one choice had changed everything. As the ceremony ended, Adrian remained beside her beneath the light of the moon. "You still do not realize what you have done, do you?" he asked. Elena smiled slightly. "I only helped someone who needed me." Adrian looked toward the kingdom below. "That is exactly why you were the one who could." Neither of them knew that the final secret of the ancient records was still waiting to be revealed. The bond between Healer and Alpha was not created by power. It was created by the one thing the kingdom had forgotten. A true heart could change even the strongest soul. The final pages of the ancient Healer records were waiting beneath the palace library, hidden behind centuries of forgotten history. Elena Whitmore and Adrian Blackthorne stood together in the quiet chamber, surrounded by the knowledge of those who came before them. The last entry was not a warning. It was a promise. It spoke of a healer who would appear when the Alpha bloodline needed balance, someone who would remind the strongest among them that true strength was never measured by power alone. Elena slowly closed the book, her fingers resting on the worn cover. She thought about the journey that brought her there. She had arrived at the palace as a young Omega healer with no reputation, no influence, and no expectation of being noticed. Many people believed she was too gentle for a world built around strength. But every choice she made had shown her something different. Kindness was not weakness. Compassion was not a limitation. And sometimes the smallest act of care could change the fate of an entire kingdom. Adrian watched her quietly. The Alpha King who once stood alone behind his crown now understood something he had forgotten. A person did not become stronger by carrying every burden alone. Sometimes strength came from allowing someone else to stand beside you. "You changed everything," Adrian said softly. Elena looked at him with surprise. "I only followed what I believed was right." Adrian smiled slightly. "That is exactly what changed everything." Outside the chamber, the kingdom waited. The people who once questioned Elena now looked at her differently. They had seen the way she treated others, the way she searched for answers when others stopped trying, and the way she cared about a person before a title. She was no longer seen as the young Omega healer who entered a place she did not belong. She had become the healer who reminded the kingdom what it had forgotten. Days later, the palace held a gathering beneath the open sky. The entire kingdom came together beneath the moonlight as Adrian addressed his people. He did not speak about power or victory. He spoke about understanding. He spoke about the importance of seeing beyond appearances and recognizing the value within every person. Elena stood beside him, feeling the quiet warmth of the moment. She had never dreamed of being recognized by a kingdom. She had never searched for a place beside the throne. She only wanted to help those who needed her. Yet that simple desire had led her to a destiny she never expected. Adrian turned toward her as the moon illuminated the palace grounds. "Do you remember the first day you entered my chamber?" he asked.
Elena smiled.
"I remember everyone telling me not to." He looked at her with a gentle expression. "And you came anyway." She looked toward the kingdom before them. "Because someone needed help." Those words had started everything. A choice made by a healer who refused to look away. A moment of compassion that reached the heart of an alpha king. And a connection that proved the greatest transformations do not always begin with power. Sometimes they begin with a single person choosing to care. From that day forward, Elena and Adrian became a symbol throughout the Northern Wolf Kingdom. A reminder that the strongest hearts are often the gentlest ones. And that even the most powerful souls can be healed when someone finally sees them for who they truly are.